In this video I'm going to walk you through the first two requirements, and both of those look at just the physical flow of the units as opposed to the equivalent units, and this one is much more complicated than that other problem you worked through earlier. And so we've got this information listed here for us for this company that makes beer, and they brew it in a blending department. We're only looking at the blending department at this point. This is all very important information right here. The materials are added at the beginning of the blending process, and that's very logical, and that's how it works for many products. If you think about beer, right, you add the water and the yeast and the hops and the whatever flavoring gets added up front, and then you make the product, right? So all of it is added typically up front, and that'll become important when we look at equivalent units. They tell us output is measured in ounces, maybe not as critical. And here are the units of production in this blending department for the month of May. So we know we start the month with 15,000 ounces sitting in a vat somewhere. And it's 70% complete, and this little asterisk here tells us, well, that's with respect to conversion costs, because we know all the material was added at the very beginning of the process, which is back in April when we started those 15,000 ounces. So okay, I've got this little schedule down here for physical units, and that's going to be different from the equivalent units. We look at the work in process as the beginning inventory is 15,000 ounces. Started during the current period. I'm going to leave that for now, because I think it gets complicated. I think it's easier if we jump down here and we say, what's my ending work in process? 30,000 ounces are sitting in some vat or container somewhere, and they're 40% completed with respect to the conversion costs. And completed and transferred out is this other 90,000 ounces. So completed and transferred out, right here, 90,000 ounces. So what we can look at here is the units to account for that are either completely done or sitting in a container at the end of the month of May is 120,000 ounces. So why I started here is because logic would tell you probably want to put 90,000 in here, started and completed during the period. But if you did that, you have beginning work in process plus started during the current period, you get 105, and that doesn't match the 120. So we kind of got to work backwards here, and we start with the 120 and we say, okay, if we had to account for 120 and we had 105 or 15 at the beginning of the period month, then we had to have started 105,000 ounces in that month. So we're going to account for 120,000 ounces. Okay, but when we look at the equivalent units, it's going to be different for materials than it is for conversion costs, because materials are all added at the very beginning of the process. So these 15,000 units that were sitting in a container at the beginning of the month, we add, and remember this, what we're looking at here is equivalent units for the month of May. So those units that were sitting in the container of the vat, we didn't add any more material for them. It was already there, all the hops and the yeast and everything else. But the conversion costs, there were 70% of the conversion costs already in this 15,000. We're going to add another 30% of the conversion costs. So 4,500 equivalent units that were completed during the month of May relative to the beginning work in process. Okay, now, so this started during the period. I'm going to leave this blank for a second, and you'll see as we come down. Because we don't, I guess I could just speak to that real quick. Of this 105,000 ounces, we don't know if those are all done. So they're 100% of the materials and some portion of the conversion costs, or if half of them are done. This doesn't give us enough information. It just tells us we've started 105,000 ounces. We need to know the various stages of completion of that 105 ounces of beer at the point of the end that happened throughout the month. So what we do know is that the completed and transferred out of blending during the period were 90,000 ounces. Okay, so this is kind of confusing here, but what we do know, of that 90,000, not all of this 90,000 was completed in the current month or started in the current month, because these 15,000 ounces that were sitting at the beginning of the month in our vat were done. So they were part of this 90,000 that were completed and moved out to the next they had to be, right? They're sitting there, we complete them, we move them out. So this 90,000, we have to subtract 15,000, and that tells us, oh, of the 90,000 that were completed and transferred out of the blending process in the month of May, 75,000 were completed in the month, started in the month of May and completed in the month of May. Went all the way through the process from start to finish. So that means that the materials are 75,000 ounces equivalent units, because all the materials added at the beginning, and the conversion cost is also 75,000 ounces because they're all completed. Then at the end of the month, we have 30,000 units sitting, 30,000 ounces sitting there, but remember, all of the materials are added at the beginning of the month, so we add 30,000, but the conversion costs are not added added all at the beginning of the month. It's only 40% complete. So we take the 30,000 times 40%. That tells us 12,000 equivalent units were completed during the month of the ending work in process. So the amount that we have of equivalent units for materials is different than the equivalent units for conversion costs. You got to think about that for a while. How can that possibly be? Well, it's because the materials are added at a different rate or point in the process than the conversion costs are. All those materials were already there, so we don't add them again, and we add all of those here. So that brings us through the first two requirements of the problem.